we are going to make values really practical. In this episode, we're going to unpack what values really are, how to identify them, what it means to enforce them, and how to use values to be a better leader. And to do this, I'm with Level 52 coach and facilitator, Dr. Mike Peters. Mike, welcome to the Executive Commute.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
There's nobody better than you, in my opinion, to unpack this concept with. And we want to know why. And I'm going to ask perhaps the hardest question throughout this whole interview. Before we get into frameworks, methods, and the deep discussion, the question is, what is it that makes you the one qualified to talk about values?
Well, that's a good question because any letters behind my name have nothing to do with values. Rather, it's a personal pursuit. It's something I've been passionate about for coming up on 15 years now. I've studied it. I've written about it. I've been published on it. And it's something I really like to talk about.
And you have hours of experience collaborating with leaders and organizations around this concept of values.
Absolutely.
So we're going to make it real. And the natural starting point is with a definition.
Okay.
If I am clueless about values, what's the definition of values that makes sense?
For me, a value is effectively the same thing as something that I would call a core belief. It's the things that sit at the center of who you are that influence, whether you realize it or not, how you interact with the world around you, how you express yourself, and how you respond to others.
So a value is a core belief.
In the way that I use it, yes. I use those two terms interchangeably. I understand that there could be nuances and we could do a deep dive into how they're different. But for today's purposes, I would propose that we just accept that they're the same.
Okay, well, that's the easy thing to do. But just so there isn't confusion, because this is genuinely something that I'm trying to figure out the difference between a value and a belief.
Okay.
For example, I can believe transparency is valuable.
Okay.
But I may not value it in my organization. I can believe honesty is important. But honesty comes at a cost that if I'm not willing to pay it, it's more of a belief than a lived value.
That is a really profound observation, and you're absolutely right. That's a challenge that lots of people get into when they select values or believe that they've identified values that I call aspirational, which we can get into later if you want, but I don't think there really is such a thing. So it's something that you admire, perhaps. It's something that you believe is valuable. Sorry, poor choice of use of that word because we're already defining it. Something that you find in high esteem and maybe you admire it in others, but it's not something that's at the core of you. And so to believe in it is one thing, but to value it in the way that I'm using that term is something entirely different.
Okay, well then let's pull apart a definition that I'm playing with right now when it comes to values, in that at its best, a value is an internal law. For example, it's a constraint that eliminates optionality. For example, if it doesn't constrain you to a certain path, then it risks being a preference. Because at its best, when we get a value right, there's a cost to it. How does that land with you?
You're making me think of one of the truisms that I'm sure it applies elsewhere, but I've certainly came across it in my military career, where the commanders would typically have three people hovering around them in addition to whoever else was just floating there. But they would have a legal officer, a policy advisor, and an operations person. And the reason that those three existed were you need to know whether something is legal, advisable, and possible. And I think that values actually are closer to advisable than legal. It's hard to make a parallel perfect because there will be consequences if you don't follow it. But the advisable thing resonates better to me because if you actually are in alignment with something that's advisable, you will reap huge rewards from it, or at least rewards that are consequential in your life. And so it's kind of different than a law because whether you follow a law or not sometimes doesn't matter that much.
Like exceeding the speed limit.
Unless you get caught.
Okay, consequences. I would argue there are consequences on either side.
Hmm.
If a value is a trade-off engine, we value this, therefore we're saying no to this.
Yes.
Where has this been a real trade-off engine for you, either personally or an experience with leaders you've worked with?
Oh, wow. Um, that's a good question. Okay, I've got an example for you, and this one's very personal. So, one point in my career, I was in receipt of an allowance appropriately, and then circumstances changed, but they changed very, very slowly. And it became clear over a significant time that it was no longer appropriate for me to be receiving this allowance. And it was enough money to be noticeable. It made a difference in my life because it's not a core value, but one of my values that I hold sort of in still high esteem is integrity. And I look back at it and I did not take action to have this allowance ceased in a timely fashion. And I came up with all sorts of excuses for why, well, maybe it was still appropriate, or nobody had told me that it should have been ceased, or, I let myself off the hook until it got to the point where every time I thought about it, I was so squeamish and I felt so uncomfortable inside that I had to do something about it. And the timing was kind of ironic because I had my allowance ceased, and 2 weeks later, the wing commander decreed that he was going to come down hard on anybody that was receiving allowances that they shouldn't have. And some of my colleagues got in a lot of trouble, and I escaped that because I did something just in time.
You did something just in time. Up until that time, you were violating or compromising the value of integrity.
Absolutely. And as I think about it, actually, that is a distinction between the sort of the policy approach, whether it's advisable, and the legal approach, is it authorized? So in my case, it was the policy bit that caused me to act. But had I not, the legal part of it with the wing commander and his crackdown would have been the legal side of it.
Mm.
I don't know if that analogy works perfectly, but it's at least sort of good.
Well, here's what it does trigger in me. There's a question later on in this interview around authorization.
Okay.
And there's a belief that it's one thing, it's easy to have values, either personally or organizationally, but it's another thing to actually authorize your values.
I wonder if you mean the same thing that I mean when I say validate.
Okay, tell me more.
So, one of the problems that people have with values is they perceive that they hold a value, but they haven't actually validated it. And so, a classic case that I use back in my 20s, the very first time that I ever thought about values, I was at a party in Christmas time and somebody was offering up a tray of chocolate. And when they offered it to me, my hand instantly went to the dark chocolate. But before I actually touched that piece of chocolate, I realized I don't like dark chocolate. I like milk chocolate. And it was really one of those light bulb moments for me because I realized that dark chocolate was my father's preference and I had never validated it against my preferences. It's a trivial example, but I think it really serves the point.
Well, here's a point that it serves, or where it takes me, is the difference between core values or inherited values, because they may not be the same.
Absolutely, they may not.
And give me an example of, I've got my idea of inherited values, but what's an example of inherited values in leadership or organizations?
I think maybe it's worth a quick rabbit trail down to how one acquires their values in the first place. So, the way that I believe it to be true, and this is center of mass on the knowledge on this, is that about the time that a person hits the age of reason, whatever you want to call that, late childhood, early teenage years, something in that vicinity. It varies
I
from
was
person.
going to say mid 40s, late 40s.
Yeah, yeah. You have to get older, but nothing says you have to mature, right? Yeah. Anyway, so the crucible that you are formed in, the relationships that you have, the geography that you live in, whether you live in a time of peace and war, whether you live in a time of famine or prosperity, uh, the friends that you have, a faith system or a worldview that is important in your life, all of these things and many, many more form each person individually. And then somehow in our own makeup, we also sift through all of these. And every person's core values are unique to them. The things, the two or three things that they truly hold most important above all. And so the reason that I come to this when you're talking about inherited values is I think that the values of those around you when you're in those formative years absolutely will influence your values, but you may not actually take them on as your own. You, in my chocolate example, you might think that you have, and sometimes you're
Hmm.
correct, sometimes you're not.
How do you know the difference if you're operating off of inherited values or if these are truly your core values?
First of all, I think that the vast majority of people haven't spent significant time in truly identifying and then validating their values. And so many people simply won't know. They'll make some assumptions, whatever that might be, if they think about it at all, and they'll go with it. And so to know whether a value is inherited or not, you need to know what your values are. And something, a value that you've seen around you, it might be something that you still hold near and dear, like integrity is to me. But integrity is not a core value of mine. It's just one that I hold near and dear, and I have validated that. That was a value of my parents.
I'm going to ask a really stupid question. It, what makes knowing your values important?
There's a bunch of things. Wondering how you fit in the world. If you have no idea what your values are, you can make choices that go against the grain, if you will. And it's like rubbing a cat backwards. You're still petting it, but it will not purr. Um, Fit is a really good one. For instance, if you are considering a relationship with somebody that's special to you, if you've not considered your values, then you'll do whatever you do and whatever happens happens. But if you do consider your values and they consider theirs, and this is part of the conversation that you have between the two of you, if you find that they're not aligned, then that is a huge flag on the play.
Hmm.
And yeah, that brings me to a point. I'll come to it. Is I don't think that you can change your values. I'll come back to that in a second, but I want to finish answering your first question. So when you're making those kind of relationship decisions, if you're not in alignment, then you have to have a really hard think about whether that's a relationship you want to continue to pursue. That's at a personal level. At a professional level, it's the same. If you are working for a corporation that you are not in alignment with, you are not going to thrive in that environment.
Hmm. So, okay, this is why values are important. Let's make it really clear. What's the downside if you haven't identified, validated your values?
You will find yourself in circumstances that aren't working out really well for you, and you won't even know why, so you won't know what to do about it. You will make, like in my case, for instance, with that allowance that I was receiving, I knew why I was feeling, I'll use a really technical term here, yucky. Um, I knew that. And yet I still didn't do anything about it because that few $100s every month was pleasant.
Hmm.
And I allowed that to color my actions, contrary to what I knew I needed to do that was right in my soul.
Hmm. So it not understanding, not validating your values can lead to drift that you can't explain. You just find yourself lost at sea, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I love the word adrift. Before we
You
move
meant,
on, I
yeah.
want to come back to that second part that I just dangled a moment ago about change. Just as I believe that values are formed in people, in their youth, I also believe that barring significant emotional events, most people's values are with them for their entire lives. Now, That doesn't mean that they're locked in every respect, because your understanding of your values certainly can evolve over time. Your prioritization of the values may, in your understanding, change. How you express your values absolutely can change, and how you see how your values show up in certain circumstances, all of these things can evolve, but the values themselves will not. So I just wanted to come back to that so that we didn't lose that. However, significant emotional events, they're game changers potentially.
Okay, so let me see if I understand this right. I'm just going to throw out three random values. Let's say my values are money, career, and health.
Okay.
That at a certain point in my life, that could be the hierarchy. I want to maximize my earning potential. Then I will spend time with my family. And when there's whatever fumes are left, I will focus on my health.
Mm-hmm.
A decade later, the hierarchy of those might change. Like not change, sorry, the order might change, where maybe health becomes more important or family becomes more important, but money is still one of my core values. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah. I would make one small qualifier to that, is if these three truly were your core values, their importance is going to be very, very close. So how you express them, how you pursue them will change, but their actual value to you, damn, I've done it again. Use the word value to describe values. How important they are to you might change, but their being in you won't. So you might see, of the three, you only have capacity to pursue one or two at any given moment, just because that's what you have available to you. That can
Mm,
change, but the fact that it's still that important to you in, deep down, that won't change.
okay. What's what's something leaders often get wrong when it comes to working on their values?
Well, what do you mean by working on?
Well, doing values work.
Oh, okay. Um, One thing is what I called before an aspirational value. So something that they admire in somebody else,
Mm,
for whatever reason. It can be totally altruistic. It could be totally honorable, or it could be something entirely different. They see that that person has something that's letting them get ahead. I wish I had that as a core value. Either way, it doesn't matter what your motivation is. If you think that you can change your values, you work on your values to adapt, or incorporate a new one that's not truly yours, that's just not going to work for you. It's going to be a lot of wasted effort and a lot of angst for nothing.
So you can admire courage in someone,
Hmm.
but it not be a value in you. You can
Absolutely.
admire the relational ability someone has, but that might not be a value of yours.
Absolutely.
And so what's the trap there? What's the thing leaders get wrong? Is it that aspirational value and then they beat themselves up over not having it?
I think so. And if there's something that's who you are, then the failure to hold that in high esteem and to charge forward, like those are the cards in your hand. That's an analogy I often use. So play them well. The fact that you wish that you had the Queen of Hearts in your hand and you don't, sorry, it's not in your hand. You can't play it. You will not get that card. So play the
Mm.
cards you've got to the best of your ability.
Yeah. Not pretending, it's really revealing the core, the true
Mhm.
hand that you have when it comes to values.
Now, that doesn't mean you can't behave as if you did believe it. Behavior is a different thing, but it'll still be influenced. And if this value that you admire is misaligned with your values, that's going to be a problem. There's lots of values out there that they can coexist quite happily. Um,
Mm.
it's when they're misaligned. Like, for instance, if you're working for an organization that that trumpets environmental consciousness, and you drive a Hummer because you love it, there's going to be a problem. That's a misaligned value.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to get to organizational values here in a bit. But if
Okay.
somebody's listening to this and they're thinking, I don't even know what my values are. What's your preferred method or a quick entry point into getting them into the values identification, validation space?
It's going to sound trivial, but just start thinking about it. As you're going through your life, consider what it is that's motivating you to make a choice. Not I'm not talking about whether you have cornflakes or Cheerios for breakfast. I'm talking about more consequential choices. Spend some time in reflection and what motivated me. What was I either trying to pursue or to avoid? And learn from those. There are lots of really good books or quizzes available that list dozens, sometimes hundreds. I've compiled over 300 potential values that you might have. Start going through lists like that and consider what would I very easily be able to remove from consideration and
Mm.
which ones bubble to the top that I think really resonate with me. And it's not something that you're going to get instantaneously. If you would have asked me 10 years ago, I would have told you my values, my three core values were to be proactive, intentional, and deliberate. I hadn't entirely understood my own work. And what I've eventually done is collapsed those three into intentionality, because there is a fair bit of overlap between being proactive and deliberate with intentionality, although they are nuanced very different. And I realized that what I'd overlooked was relationships. So I can say with a fair degree of certainty, having dug into this for a long time, that my two core values are intentionality and relationships. Now, there are
Mm.
other things I hold in high esteem, like integrity that I mentioned earlier, but those are the two things that are core to me. And it took years of consideration to come to that. But now when I make decisions, I can consider instantly, how does this live through me?
Yeah. There's something you said that I want to translate to a theory around values identification, because it's not just what are the values I want to embody. There has to be some forensics that prove that these are your values. Where have you demonstrated proof that these are your values? So I want you to push back on this,
Mhm.
but some questions like, what have you really sacrificed repeatedly? Where have you made sacrifices? Because that shows you the things that you've made more important than others. And if you can identify the pattern, then that as a mechanism for identifying your values. Or something I heard once was, you know what, your calendar and your bank statement will tell me what your values are, because what you spend your time and your money is the greatest evidence. You can say family is a value, but if you're at late work events and your family is just one of those side things after everything's covered, then maybe you need to relook at that. Or the last one I'll throw out there, Mike, and then you can pull apart any of these three, is reflect on moments where you were deeply hurt or even
Mhm.
offended, because
Mhm.
that can often identify what's the value that was violated,
Yeah, absolutely.
that is very important.
Similar to that, the other side of the coin is, when did you shock yourself with how proud you were of something in a moment?
Mm,
Watching someone that was near and dear to you, or something that you did that made you go, wow, I love myself for having done that. And then
mhm.
tear that apart.
Yeah, permission to be proud of yourself
Mm,
when you are perfectly aligned at that moment. We're at your value sweet spot, for lack of a better term.
yeah. And then ask yourself, what was that all about? When
Yeah.
when you felt guilt or shame, like you just mentioned, or pride, or confidence or success, or any of those strong emotions, is like, tear it apart. What was that all about? What can I learn from that moment?
Okay, so these questions can get you started on your personal values. What's the difference between your personal values and organizational values?
Ah, well, it's funny because they share a lot in common and somehow are still totally different.
Okay,
So, like we've talked about already, your personal values are baked into you. Corporate values are selected. Now,
that's
sometimes they're
it.
selected well and sometimes they're selected poorly, but they're selected.
Okay, what
Sometimes
makes
there's,
the difference then?
okay,
Selected well or poorly?
a bunch of things can. Some of them are values that are lip service only, that no one then ever pays any attention to, which probably research would suggest is most of the corporate values that you see aren't really reflective of the values of the corporation. or another term that you can use is the culture, because in this case, those two become synonymous, more or less. Um, or again, the aspirational bit is if you want to be something that you are not, and you simply say this is a value, and yet you don't have a roadmap for how to get from where you are to where you want to go, that will doom you as well, because it'll make people feel deficient somehow or uninspired or like imposters, and that's highly demotivating. So if you have an aspirational value and you don't note it as such, and you just say these are our corporate values, you have done yourself a huge disservice. The only way you can get around that is to say these are the four values that this company already exhibits, and these are the two that we are working towards. And then you need a plan for how to get from where you are to where you want to go.
So without going into extreme detail, what does a plan look like? Someone's going, okay, I want the right values. I want to do this right. What does a plan look like?
Well, this one really resonates with me because it's highly intentional. There's a classic case of somebody that took over as a CEO of a corporation that was foundering. And one of the values that he wanted to bring was, well, he called it environment, but it wasn't the way that we all use it in thinking of things as green and carbon gases and such. He was more about cleanliness. Well, I mean, he had elements of that, but cleanliness was part of it as well, and pride of workspace and stuff. And so when he looked around the workspace, it was a production facility, and he saw just the mess that was everywhere. And it showed up in people's lives intangibly as well as physically with crap laying around on the floor and whatever. So he started carrying around just one of those blue recycling bins. And as he was in a conversation with, one of his shop foremen or somebody on the line or whatever, and he saw something that didn't belong there, he just casually, without drawing any attention to it, lean over, pick it up, toss it in the basket, and carry on the conversation. Within 2 weeks, all of the managers were doing the same thing. And within 2 months, the floor was spotless.
What you're hitting at in our language is the viral contagion in a positive way. When
Absolutely.
you embody the values, it's less about enforcing them. When those with the greatest influence are embodying what you say is important, that will spread in a positive fashion.
Peter Drucker's famous for saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I always chuckle because it's true. However, you can use strategy to alter culture.
Yeah,
you just have to be wise about how you go about it. You can't wish it away, that's for sure.
What's the one thing organizations get wrong most when it comes to values?
They either don't think about them, or they come up with some trite list of values that looks good in marketing. And they don't actually think about what good values for them are. And good values, you can only get to them two ways. One is if you've already got an organization and you've never thought about your values, then you need to consider what values does your organization actually embody. Smaller teams, it's way easier to do that than bigger teams, but it's still something that you've got to do. Name the values that exist. Those are your values, whether you like it or not. The other way, especially works out well for startups, but it can work, and we'll get to it in a second, is pick values that you believe are appropriate to support the vision that you have as a leader, and then hire to fit. Train for performance later, but hire to fit your values. Now, again, if you've got a large corporation, it will take a long time to transition. But this is what I meant about the aspirational values. This could be part of the plan, is that some people that are misaligned might just have to be let go. Some people that are on the fence, sometimes that's adjustable through behavior, even if it doesn't, that's enough. And sometimes, any new hires, then you need to pick the people that actually fit the values that you want to get to, not where you've come from.
Yeah. Otherwise, you think you might be hiring for performance, but you're also hiring drag if they don't embody those values.
So two key elements there. You need to know your real values as a corporation. And here's the kicker. The person that you're interviewing to take on a new role in your company, they have to know their values well enough to articulate them to you so that you can do
Hmm.
an intentional comparison.
So great. You know, when you were just describing what goes wrong inside organizations, it also had me think that what goes wrong around values is, even if you get your values right, if you don't continually use them, then you're creating space for that undesirable mutation. Because the more that when we work with leaders, if I'm working with a CEO, I'm asking them, how have you weaved the values of the organization into the all hands or your ELT meetings? Because the more you create repetition around underscoring when they were embodied or demonstrated, or course correcting when they weren't, that's the use of values in real time.
I've done a lot of sailing, especially in one chapter of my life where I raced offshore. My biggest race was from Boston to Bermuda, excuse me, from Boston to Bermuda. That was an interesting adventure. So I often think in terms of navigation. And so if your values, if you will represent that your values, actually, this is totally coincidence, but are like a compass. I just happen to have one right here. I use it as an object lesson. But anyway, if you have a compass and you don't look at it, that's a problem. If you have a compass and you have a piece of ferrous metal that's too close to it, you will pull it off. So if something, in my case, I'm using the same example again, but that tidy little sum that was in my paycheck every month was pulling my values, and I didn't do anything about it. I didn't take that, I eventually did. Or if it's broken entirely, if something has catastrophically crushed it, that's not going to work either. And then the other thing is if you know it's there and don't look at it,
Yeah.
and you intentionally choose to go contrary to your values. So those
Okay.
are sort of the four categories that I like to break that into.
Well, I absolutely love it, because if the listeners are like me right now, I am envisioning my values as a compass. So first of all, I need to know what true north and the directional elements of my values are. But then how do I use that compass in a routine fashion so that I'm constantly checking navigation around where I'm headed? That is a great metaphor for the right use of values. Okay, we're going to jump into a different section, Mike.
Okay.
I've prepared what I think are some tough true false questions. I'm going to
Okay.
read a statement. You get to pick a side fast.
Okay.
You can add nuance, but only after you commit to true or false. And then just give me a reason in one sentence or a story, either personal or a client. And here's the one caveat. If you say it depends, I'm going to stop you and make you choose a direction first. Okay.
Okay. I understand the rules.
Okay. So, true or false? If a leader cannot predict their behavior under stress, they do not have values, they have moods.
False. Everybody has values. They just might not know about them.
Okay, so it's becoming aware of the value.
You have values whether you realize it or not.
You just haven't identified and put them to use.
And validated them.
Therefore,
Yeah. Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
therefore, then you're at drift. You're only susceptible to your mood.
Yes.
Your moods, your preferences, whatever it is in that moment.
Yeah, as long as you
Which,
define mood widely. Yeah.
okay, which I'm gonna highlight, which makes you unpredictable.
Yes. Yep. That absolutely would influence that.
Okay, next one. True or false? A core characteristic of a value is that it must cost you something. Money, status, or relationships.
False. And the reason that I'm going to say that is because it's not always about cost. Sometimes it's about benefit too. If you do the do, you don't have time to do the don't. So if you are embracing your values, you will be enriched by them, and cost won't ever be an issue.
Okay, so help me then when you say that. I get it. And we often say, when you say yes to something, it means you say no to something else, and vice versa.
Yes.
So if there's not a trade-off engine, then is it a value?
Yes. I don't know if that was a yes no answer, but It's still a value. And you're absolutely right. There is a trade off. But if you have embraced your values so deeply, you won't be susceptible to drifting from them either very far or very often. And so you'll not have to make those trades consciously because you will just follow the path that your compass is leading you on because you know it's right. And yeah, you might look to a distant shore and go, that is attractive. I really like the look of that. But this is telling me where to go.
Hmm. Okay. Third, true or false? True or false? Strong values or clear values make decision making more complex because they add strict rules.
False. That one's an easy one for me. Strong values, a strong understanding of your values makes decision making easy. If you know what the guardrails are, it's really easy to do the right thing in the moment. And this is where that cost comes in that you were talking about. If you have to choose, let's go back to my same example. I mean, I know we're beating a dead horse with that, but I had to choose between integrity and financial gain. The cost was the financial gain.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I held my head high and I was so grateful for the, opportunity to make things right, especially before trouble happened.
Hmm. When you get your values right, when they're clear, it removes the rumination and that internal negotiation.
Well, and if you are aware, if you have those strong values that you mentioned in that question, you've already pre-considered the off ramps and you know what you need to do. Challenges can still come up if things are equally good or equally bad, and you have to choose between them. Those aren't values challenges, though. Those are something else. If they're equally whatever.
Okay. Let's go to an organizational example. When a team, an executive team, circles the same conflicts and politics repeatedly, it's usually a values clarity issue.
If I'm picturing your question correctly, I'm going to say true. And probably, yeah, the clarity piece is the bit that's missing. If they keep circling it, it's because they don't have that clarity. They don't really know what they're dealing with, or they haven't made the hard call. Coming back to your cost thing. Okay, I'm seeing that it comes to bear more often than perhaps I was allowing for. But if you have to give up your top performer because he's a poor fit, if your values are strong, you give up your top performer.
If your values are strong, which is I think, a very real dilemma for leaders if they're very conscious and committed to their values. Okay, real value, true or false? Real values should feel inspiring to the leader.
Oh, true. I've already spoken to that. If you're leaning into your values, they should lead you. They should motivate you. They should empower you. They should enrich you. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to give you a different perspective and we can dive into it, or you can just agree that I'm right. When you get your values right, it feels constraining rather than inspiring because it limits options and it forces trade-offs. Effective, but not inspiring.
Sounds to me like you wish you had different cards in your hand.
Say more.
It's a perspective issue. So you're seeing the limitations and I'm seeing the opportunities. So you're seeing this is what's constraining me. This is what's limiting me. This is what's costing me. I take it it's the same coin. I totally grant you that, and that you're absolutely right. But look at the risk, look at the opportunity, look at the cost, look at the reward, look at the constraint, look at the freedom. I have the freedom to pursue that which I know is near and dear to me. Totally a perspective issue.
Well, here's what I love about this, because when I say constraint, I see that as a force for good.
Okay.
In our programs, for example, the Accelerated Leader Program, we talk about creative constraints. How do we limit the options so that we can get precision and focus? So I don't see constraints as a negative thing.
Okay.
And so when I frame it this way, I get my values right. It's a productive constraint that enables me to operate with precision.
Absolutely no. I use a different term for the same concept now that I understand what you mean by that. But guardrails or handrails.
Mm.
I know going into a circumstance that these are the things that are important to me that I will guard carefully. And whether that's a constraint in the way that you've defined it or a guardrail the way I do, the same thing. I think.
Yeah, guardrails, very similar. Here's the last one. This is a test because I know you touched on it. Can you, true or false, you can identify your values by simply looking at what you admire in other leaders.
Okay, I'm going to say false, because just because you admire it in somebody else doesn't mean it's in you. It could be a behavior that you absolutely hold in high esteem. Selflessness, for instance. We've seen some amazing leaders, Mahatma Gandhi, Mother Teresa. Come to mind, Nelson Mandela. Their generosity of spirit, I admire. I do not share it. I do
Mm.
not have that degree of compassion in my life. Do I wish I did? It doesn't matter because it's not my core value. Can I behave with compassion? Absolutely. But just because you admire it in somebody else, sometimes it's a reflection of what you see in yourself, but sometimes it's just an admiration.
Hmm. Let's move to the would you rather section.
Okay.
The reality is leaders are constantly playing a game of would you rather. You named one. Would you rather have a high performer who frequently violates values, or would you rather have somebody who honors the values and is an average performer? I'm not asking you to answer that question, but these are examples of the constant would you rather game that leaders play. So I'm going to ask you some would you rathers.
Okay.
For each one, give me your gut answer fast and then back it up with a story or an example. Okay, number one, would you rather? Would you rather hand over your private journal or your calendar to prove your values?
I don't keep a journal, but I'm going to say calendar, just because I think that, as you already said before, your calendar, your bank book, that'll tell you where your priorities and your values are, and that it'll be instantly recognizable. Whereas a journal, sometimes it's going to be unclear, so it's less helpful.
Yeah, and I think the journal oftentimes can capture aspiration,
Hmm.
intent, but intent doesn't always translate to living values.
Exactly. And my understanding of journals, sometimes it's musings, sometimes it's observations. So perhaps it could be an excellent tool, but I think a calendar is much, much blacker, more black and white in the demonstration you're looking for.
Yeah, and I think what crystallizes it for me is intent without action does not make it a value. The value is where you're taking action in your life. Where can you back it up with evidence?
Absolutely. And coming back to the corporate example, that's exactly it. So a company that intends to do something somehow, but doesn't, it's not a
Yeah,
value.
no, that's in the journal of the board meeting or the executive leadership notes.
Exactly.
Okay, let's go to the second. Would you rather? If you had to expose a flaw, would you rather admit that your values are unclear, you just don't know what they are, or your values are weak? You know them, but you don't authorize them. Or your leadership around the values is weak.
Wow. Okay. So would I rather? I'd rather say that my understanding is unclear, because to me that there's more honor in that than in saying, yeah, I know exactly what my values are and I choose not to abide by them. Because to me that's moral character, and that's also important to me.
So this would you rather is important because if if I think of experiences inside organizations, for listeners out there, there's probably truth in both. Where do I lack clarity in the values and therefore I don't really know what the standard is? And if I don't know what the standard is, then how can I expect other people to know what the standard is?
Well, let's go back to your example. You talked about family. Worth work-life balance is what I think you were alluding to. If you are unclear what appropriate work-life balance is and you spend too much time at work, to me, that's much more forgivable than if you know damn well that your family is supposed to matter to you, because it really does, and yet you still choose to spend 80 hours in the office every week.
Yeah. It, then it feels like that value is more aspirational than it is reality.
Yes.
Okay. Here's the last would you rather. Would you rather lead a team that feels safe but confused, or a team that feels pressured but perfectly clear?
Pressured, but perfectly clear.
What makes that more important?
The clarity of it. Unclear, I don't think serves anybody. In your previous example, not knowing what your values were, that I hope would be a temporary, transitory step towards getting a better understanding of them. The same thing, you've got this comfortable, amorphous mass that, yeah, it's comfortable. Nobody gets hurt. It's psychologically safe, but we don't know where we're going. We don't know whether we're doing a good job of getting to where we're going. We don't even know where we are.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem very valuable to me at all.
Yeah, I would say in working with leadership and executive teams, if your values aren't clear, then you're creating a space for politics, fear, confusion, and just the mutation from all of that is definitely undesirable.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking of fiefdoms. I've worked in an organization that was like that. The director, even though he was a marvelous man and one-on-one, he was a joy to spend time with. He was a terrible leader because he never communicated his vision. He never communicated his priorities. And so the second tier of leadership fought with each other openly sometimes to assume the power that he left vacant.
Mm.
And it was one of the most toxic organizations I've ever been a part of.
What's the worst advice you could give someone around values?
Don't worry about it.
Say more.
If you've never thought about values and you've listened to this podcast, you no longer have that ability to say, I didn't know. So you now know that values are a thing and that values influence you whether you realize it or not. So now it's your responsibility to start digging, start thinking, start reflecting on what you see around you. Because if you don't, you're just going to carry on with the way that you've been. And if that's acceptable to you, so be it. But I would, challenge that anybody that does engage with their values will find a much more fulfilling life over time.
Yeah. As opposed to the drifting, navigationless leadership or organization.
Reactive versus proactive.
Yeah. Well, your statement aligns with Dr. Bruce Lipton, Stanford biologist, who says once you become aware that you're really responsible for your environment, then you become really responsible for your environment. So listeners, here's the opportunity. You get to take advantage of this and dive deeper into your values, which brings me to the last question, Mike. If I'm a listener and I need to remember one thing about values in this discussion, after this episode, what should it be?
Live intentionally. You might not have a perfect understanding of your values, but you're going to have some suspicions if you think about it. Live by those to start with. See how it works. When you go into the next calendar planning cycle, if you think family is important to you, make sure you protect time with family. See how that works for you. See what resonates, see what doesn't, and keep modifying and maneuvering, because this is all part of self-awareness, and self-awareness is not a destination. Self-awareness is a journey.
Beautiful. Find something you like in this episode, put it to work, and that's what being in the laboratory is. Mike, we'll definitely have to get you back on, but thank you for joining me on the Executive Commute.
Thanks, Jayson. It's been a pleasure.